Hey everyone, and welcome back. You know that feeling? The one where the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, not because of a ghost story, but because of something human. That moment when an ordinary day, a simple task, takes a sharp, unsettling turn, and you find yourself face to face with someone whose intentions are anything but clear. Tonight, we're diving deep into those chilling encounters, the kind that don't involve jump scares or monsters, but the quiet, creeping dread that comes from people who are just off. Stories where a strange look, an uncomfortable question, or an unexplained presence spirals into something truly frightening. So, dim the lights, get comfortable, or maybe don't, because these are the encounters that remind us that sometimes the scariest things are all too real. Let's get into the first story. My name is Sarah, and this happened a few years ago when I was deep in the throes of university. The campus library, a grand old gothic building, was my second home during exam season. It was usually pretty deserted after 10 p.m., especially the stuffy, dimly lit history annex on the third floor, which was my preferred spot for cramming. Quiet, you know? Or so I thought. It started subtly. I'd be buried in a textbook, highlighter poised, and I'd get that prickly feeling on the back of my neck like I was being watched. I'd glance up, and there he'd be. Mr. Henderson. He was one of the older, part-time librarians, a tall, reedy man with wispy gray hair and glasses that always seemed to be sliding down his nose. He'd just be there, shelving books nearby, or wiping down a table a few aisles over. Always quiet. Too quiet. The first time he spoke to me, I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Burning the midnight oil, are we, Miss Thompson?" His voice was surprisingly soft, a little raspy, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. I just mumbled something about a big exam. He nodded slowly, his eyes lingering on my textbook for a moment too long. "Fascinating period, the tutors," he said before drifting away. Okay, a bit odd, but harmless enough, I figured. Just a librarian making small talk. But it kept happening. Night after night, if I was there late, so was Mr. Henderson. He started asking more specific questions. "Still wrestling with Henry VIII, Sarah?" He'd used my first name. I hadn't told him my first name. I rationalized it. Maybe he'd seen my student ID when I checked out a book or overheard someone else. Still, it felt off. Then came the gifts. One night, I found an old, leather-bound bookmark tucked into my history book when I returned from the water fountain. It was beautiful, but it had this strange, almost metallic smell. Another time, it was a perfectly sharpened pencil, the old-fashioned kind, laid neatly beside my notes. No note, no explanation. Just these little, unsolicited offerings. My unease grew from a flicker to a steady hum. I started packing up earlier, avoiding the third floor if I could. The escalation peaked on a Tuesday. I was particularly stressed, trying to memorize dates, and I'd stayed later than usual. The annex was utterly silent, save for the hum of the ancient fluorescent lights. I heard his footsteps, that soft, almost soundless tread, approaching my carrel. I kept my head down, pretending to be engrossed. "You seem troubled tonight, Sarah," he murmured, his voice right beside my ear. I flinched. He was standing so close I could smell that faint metallic scent again, mixed with old paper. "Just tired, Mr. Henderson," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Perhaps I can be of assistance?" He leaned in, and I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the way they didn't quite blink enough. "I have a rather comprehensive understanding of the period, and of other things." His gaze dropped to my open notebook, where I'd idly doodled a little caricature of my grumpy history professor. "Professor Davies, isn't it? A difficult man. But he has his vulnerabilities." My blood ran cold. How did he know Davies? How did he know what I was thinking, what I was doodling? It wasn't just about history anymore. I should get going," I stammered, starting to gather my things, my hands shaking. "Oh, but the night is still young, Sarah," he said, his voice losing its softness, taking on a harder edge. He didn't move. He was blocking my only way out of the carrel. "And we have so much to discuss. For instance, why you always sit facing the emergency exit. That was it. I didn't say another word. I faked a coughing fit, bent over as if to grab a tissue from my bag, and then, in one swift movement, I ducked under his arm and bolted. I didn't look back. I ran down the 3 flights of stairs, out into the cool night air, my heart pounding like a drum. I reported him, of course. They said he was spoken to. I saw him a few times after that from a distance. He'd just look at me with that same unreadable expression. I never stayed late in the library again. I still don't know what he wanted or how he knew those little things. But sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I swear I can still catch a faint whiff of old paper and something metallic, and I feel that cold dread all over again. Story 2. My name is Leo, and I used to do handyman work to make ends meet. This one job, though, this one still gives me the creeps. I got a call from a Mrs. Gable. She sounded elderly, very polite, said she needed some shelves put up in her new apartment. The address was in one of those older, slightly run-down apartment buildings on the edge of town, the kind with creaky floors and that permanent smell of dust and old cooking. When I got there, Mrs. Gable was exactly as I pictured, small, frail, with kind eyes. The apartment was tidy, filled with antique furniture. She offered me tea, which I accepted, and we chatted while I got my tools out. She mentioned she'd just moved in a week ago to be closer to her sister. She was on the ground floor. As I started measuring for the shelves in her living room, I heard it, faint but distinct. The sound of children running directly above me. Thump, 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 then a giggle. Sounds like you've got some lively neighbors upstairs, I commented, smiling. Mrs. Gable's smile faltered. Just for a second, but I saw it. Oh yes, she said, her voice a little tight. The children. She quickly changed the subject, asking about the type of wood I was using. I worked for a couple of hours. The thumping and giggling continued intermittently. Sometimes it sounded like a ball bouncing, other times like small feet racing back and forth. It was pretty constant. Normal kid stuff, I thought, though maybe a bit much for a weekday afternoon. Around 3 p.m., as I was drilling the pilot holes, there was a particularly loud crash from upstairs, followed by what sounded like a child wailing. Everything all right? Up there, do you think? I asked, pausing my drill. Mrs. Gable was staring at the ceiling, her face pale. She wrung her hands. They can be a bit boisterous, she whispered. Their parents are not always attentive. There was something in her tone, a kind of fear, that set me on edge. It wasn't just annoyance at noisy neighbors. A little later, I needed to use the restroom. Hers was tiny, and the vent fan was directly connected to the ceiling. As I was washing my hands, I heard it again, clearer this time through the vent. A child's voice, not giggling now, but humming a tune. A really simple, almost nursery rhyme tune, but it was flat, devoid of any joy. And then, another voice, an adult's, very low and stern. I couldn't make out the words, just the harsh, disciplinary tone. The humming stopped abruptly. I finished the shelves. Mrs. Gable seemed pleased, but distracted. As she was writing me a check, she kept glancing up at the ceiling. Thank you, Leo, she said, handing it to me. Her hand was trembling. You've been very kind. Then, she leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. Be careful when you leave. Sometimes they like to watch from the window upstairs. My stomach did a little flip. The children? She just nodded, her eyes wide. I packed up my tools, a strange sense of unease settling over me. As I walked out the front door of the building, I couldn't help it. I looked up. The apartment directly above Mrs. Gable's had its curtains drawn, but in one window there was a tiny gap. And in that gap, I saw a face. Just for a second. Small, pale, with dark eyes. It wasn't a child. It was an adult, but oddly proportioned, almost child-sized, staring right at me. Then the curtain twitched closed. I hurried to my truck, feeling like I was being X-rayed. I never heard from Mrs. Gable again, though I often wondered about her, alone in that apartment beneath whatever was going on upstairs. I tried to tell myself it was just an overactive imagination, a lonely old woman, maybe some reclusive tenants. But the look in her eyes, and that brief, chilling glimpse of the face in the window, it felt like something much darker. I never took another job in that building, that's for sure. Story 3. I'm Mark, and I've always loved the outdoors. A few summers back, I decided to go on a solo kayaking and camping trip to Heron Lake, a place known for being pretty remote. I wanted to disconnect, just me and the wilderness. I found a perfect little spot on a secluded cove, set up my tent, and felt that familiar peace settle over me. The first night was great. Stars like you wouldn't believe, the lapping of water against the shore. The second day, as I was paddling back from exploring the far side of the lake, I noticed them. Another campsite, directly across the small cove from mine, maybe 100 yards away. It hadn't been there the day before. 2 figures, a man and a woman, setting up a large faded green tent. I gave a friendly wave as I paddled past. The man, burly with a thick beard, just stared. The woman, thin with stringy blonde hair, offered a curt nod. Okay, not the chatty types, I figured. No big deal. Later that evening, as I was tending my small campfire, I heard voices carrying across the water. Theirs. It was too far to make out distinct words, but the tone was argumentative, sharp, punctuated. It went on for a while, then stopped abruptly. An hour later, just as dusk was really settling in, I saw the man. He was standing at the edge of his campsite, by the water, just looking over at my little fire. He didn't wave. He just stood there, a dark silhouette against the fading light for a good 10 minutes. It was unnerving. I told myself he was just enjoying the view. The next morning, I decided to hike a trail that led up a ridge overlooking the lake. About halfway up, I heard footsteps behind me. It was them, the man and the woman. "Fancy meeting you here?" the woman said, her voice flat. She had very pale blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Small world," I replied, trying to sound casual. The man, whose name I learned was Jed, just grunted. "You out here all alone?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Yep, just me," I said, enjoying the peace and quiet. "Ain't much peace to be had these odd days," Jed muttered, looking around as if expecting something to jump out of the trees. They didn't stay long, just asked a few more oddly pointed questions about how long I was staying and if I'd seen anyone else around. Then they continued up the trail ahead of me. I had the distinct feeling they'd followed me. That night, the feeling of being watched was intense. I kept my campfire small. I could see their fire across the water, bigger, almost aggressive. Every so often I'd see a shadow move over there. I started to feel really isolated, vulnerable. My cell phone had no service. I decided I'd pack up and leave first thing in the morning, a day earlier than planned. Something just felt wrong. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake. Not by a sound, but by that primal instinct that tells you something is close. I lay dead still in my sleeping bag, my heart thudding. My tent flap was zipped, but through the thin nylon I could see a shape, a tall, dark shape, standing motionless just outside my tent. It didn't move. It just stood there, breathing. I could hear soft, steady breathing. Terror, cold and absolute, washed over me. I didn't dare make a sound. Was it Jed? What did he want? My mind raced through horrible scenarios. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only a minute or two. Then, as silently as it appeared, the shape moved away. I heard the faintest crunch of leaves. I didn't sleep another wink. As soon as the first hint of gray light touched the sky, I was out of that tent, packing with frantic, silent speed. I didn't even make coffee. I just wanted out. I kept glancing across the cove. Their tent was still there, silent. No smoke from their fire pit. I loaded my kayak, pushed off, and paddled away as fast as I could, not looking back until I rounded. The point and their campsite was out of view. I never found out who or what was outside my tent that night, or what their intentions were. Maybe they were just curious. Maybe they were genuinely strange. But I'll tell you this. I haven't been solo camping since. And every time I see a still, dark shape in the periphery, especially at night, I feel that same icy grip of fear. Some silences are peaceful. Others are just waiting.